Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at the Hopenning, the place where hope is happening. I'm here with my friend Fran, my co-host, who's up in Northern Alberta. I'm in Calgary, and we both have the desire to bring more hope into the world. And we created this space called the Hopenning, the place where hope is happening. So we welcome you here with us today at episode number 58. Fran is a full-time school teacher. She has been teaching for 34 years. 34, that's right, Fran? And she also is a part-time rapid transformational therapy practitioner, helping people, giving people hope every single day. That is my full-time job. I work full-time as a rapid transformational therapy practitioner and clinical hypnotherapist, also just giving people hope. Today we have a very special guest with us, and Fran will have the honors to introduce her to you.
You know what's really cool is we've never had a guest before who's an expert in Alzheimer's. And our guest today, Jessica Goldmuntz Stokes, is an expert and not by her own choosing, right? Jessica Stokes has navigated multiple family members with Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's disease. She is an avid labyrinth-walker, a trained Veriditas Labyrinth Facilitator, and a published author of a book called Seeking Clarity in the Labyrinth, A Daughter's Journey Through Alzheimer's. She provides labyrinth workshops for anyone experiencing loss, and she also is an entrepreneur. She owns a successful cleaning business in the Denver, Colorado area, and she believes strongly in supporting all people on their journeys, wherever they are, kind of like us. Always seeking her own growth and truth, she teaches and performs belly dance and practices therapeutic touch and Reiki. A daughter, a mom, a wife, a friend, and a caregiver. Welcome, Jessica. Right? A journey that has not been easy, but you no doubt have touched multiple lives through what you have done in the face of adversity. So, Jessica, before we begin, tell us a little bit about your background. I know that you live in Colorado. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to the place where you ended up being the caregiver for people who you love so much, who ended up with such a devastating illness?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me today. I absolutely believe strongly both with finding our hope and finding our journey and finding ways in which we can spread that into the world. So it's an honor and pleasure to be with you all today. Here's my cat Bella, and she believes that too. So she will be perhaps joining us for a little bit. So
Those eyes.
no. Believe it or not, she's actually a really scaredy cat with most people except me and people on Zoom. So our journey, it's so interesting how you don't know where life's going to take you. And you certainly don't when you're in the end of your 30s and your mom's diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And would have had no idea where the next 15 years would have brought me, and here I am today. So I was in my late 30s. I was raising my kids. At the time, my kids were about 6 and 8. I had them in my I guess they might have been 10. I had my kids in my late 20s. I was doing my mom thing and living my life and trying to keep it all together. And my mom was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. It was a very long journey, as often Alzheimer's can be. It was early onset, which sometimes is this quick and fast thing. For mom, it was actually a really long journey, 13 years from the start to diagnosis to when she passed in early 2022. In that time, my uncle was diagnosed with Parkinson's, her brother-in-law, and then my aunt, my mom's sister, was then also diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Her journey was fast. My aunt was from diagnosis till passing was about 4 years. My uncle and Parkinson's was a little bit longer journey. So I found myself in this interesting position of multiple people that I cared about deeply and loved, and needing different levels of care. For my mom, it was supporting my dad as he navigated his relationship with her that changed over the time. And my role with both of them changed. I went from being their daughter. My mom at the time, this onset and start, was one of my best friends. She was my call. I talked to her every single day. She would listen to me and my kids, stories about my kids. And she was really a backbone for me. At the same time, I had gone through a divorce. So she was a person that I would tell stories about my kids to. And she was just this really wonderful backbone for me. So I was dealing with my loss, the loss of my mother, my children starting to lose their grandma, and then supporting my dad as he lost his confidant and his best friend and his person. And my relationship with them changed. It went from daughter and best friend to my mom, to this weird journey that at the end, I was helping my dad make daily decisions for my mom and having to push him to make some really difficult decisions. When we had to make the decision eventually to place her into a facility, a community to support her, he didn't want to. He needed to. His health started to become very compromised, and it was the right choice for both of them. Her last years were actually really lovely and beautiful once we made that shift. But my relationship certainly changed to really almost the adult and the parent in the relationship with my parents. So at the same time, my cousins were starting to navigate and support their parents. I was close to my cousins as well, and my aunt and uncle, and they were closer. My mom and dad live about 3 hours from me. My aunt and uncle were here in town. So my support for them became easier in some ways. They were local, and I could swing by on my way home from work, or when I had a couple hours, I could stop by. And so it was, in a strange way, it was some aspects of supporting them was easier. It was not as close to home. It wasn't as heart-wrenching. It wasn't my parents, and they really, really needed it and really liked it. So it was a little bit easier in some ways to support them. So in the journey, we lost them both. I feel like an expert in making a room in a variety of different facilities and communities. We navigated multiple room changes and hospice relationships, and certainly just some of the aspects of things that happen in the illness and the disease. So, which led me, I can keep talking, you guys can interrupt me.
Keep talking.
Which led me to this frustration and this, and I've always been a writer, journaler, and kind of playing with that. I started doing a little bit of dabbling with writing. In helping my parents clean out the garage to make room to park the car in the winter. I found a box of letters that included some letters from my parents, from my mom to her mother, my grandma, when she left home when she was 18. And I was struck by my mother's voice, and that I found this thread. We were actually about 9 years into it. And I found this connection to her, and it was so lovely. And it made me really love reading the letters, and then really decide that I needed to do something I needed to find a way and navigate the second half in it. At the time, I didn't know how long we had, but it shifted my way of relating to her and to the entire process we were in. And I started writing, and through writing, it gave me a place, an outlet, which ended up becoming really this beautiful space to contain and hold my grief, and then also find and remember her in her, what she was as a whole entire person, not just who she was in the veil of the illness and the disease.
So did you find that documenting, the writing, the writing process, it helped you to have hope, right? Or maybe not hope isn't the right word, but more of a, I'll be okay. I can do this. I can.
Yeah, absolutely. So the finding her, so those letters gave me this sense of seeing her, and I was able to see her in her entire being, not just, we've been so like downtrodden by the disease. And at that point, and it was all this, and I was mad, like my initial, like, here, neither here nor there, but part of my initial reaction to mom's disease was I was mad. I was losing my friend, and it wasn't her fault, but I was mad at that this was happening to us. And by finding those letters and then starting to write about it, there was this beautiful, like, it was like a flower opening. It was this lovely, like, oh, right, she's not just who she is in this cloud of illness. She's this human being that has been around well beyond the few years that she's had this disease. And look at all the things and the ways in which who she's been to all of us. And it really reframed the illness for me. And no one wants Alzheimer's. It's terrible. None of us want it. At the similar but different time of those letters, my aunt and my mom had built a labyrinth in their backyard, in my parents' backyard. And the labyrinth that they built was, they both sort of stumbled upon relationships to labyrinths, which my 5-minute elevator speech of a labyrinth is, it's a path, a walking path that is often in places like botanical gardens, community centers, often churches. They've been around forever. There's been a resurgence in the past, I don't know, 35, 40 years. And my aunt and uncle, or my aunt and my mom, both sort of became interested around the same time and got very excited about them. And my aunt was building and giving presentations, and she was very connected to it. And together they built this labyrinth. So we had this beautiful labyrinth in their backyard, and I started walking it. And that, connected with those letters, was this injection of hope, injection of things are going to be okay. Like, it might not be what you choose, but you can find things that still connect you to mom as the person, because then all these things started to come up. I started looking around her house and seeing the things and how she had influenced my dad. And even in the disease, she was still there. She was still she was still the same person she was. It was just a different version of her. And the writing absolutely brought me through it. And to the very end, there's this, even her passing became this letting go. She needed to let go. She was done. And it was a gift. It ended up her passing. And I really feel that, again, no one wants cancer. No one wants to have Alzheimer's. But in those journeys, we can find ways in which we can relate to it that can bring us to different places.
So the labyrinth in itself, like, which is super interesting, because when you talked about your mom making a labyrinth, your auntie making a labyrinth, right? And they both ended up with Alzheimer's. A friend of mine made a labyrinth. And I know there's no connection, but it's super interesting because a friend of mine made a labyrinth. I had never heard of a labyrinth in my life. This is probably 15 years ago. And she and her husband made a labyrinth. They live on an acreage, beautiful. And he ended up with early Alzheimer's. He ended up with early Alzheimer's, or maybe he already had it. Like, that's the thing. I don't know. They didn't share that. But is there something in the literature that says building a labyrinth, walking a labyrinth is helpful for Alzheimer's?
That's not good news for me, because I built one in 2012, 2011.
I just wonder if there's, not that it creates the Alzheimer's, but does it help with to prolong?
Sure. Well, and I guess I would say anything that helps our brain work is going to help us with wherever. And, there's a funny thing. Lots of people will ask me, well, are you afraid you're going to get Alzheimer's? Well, I don't know, like every single day, like we're exposed to a million different things. I could get cancer. I could have Alzheimer's, get Alzheimer's. I could get hit by a truck, right? Like, we don't know, right? Can we make sure we're eating healthy and we're exercising and we're doing the things we need to do to keep ourselves in a good space? Absolutely. And one of those for Alzheimer's is engaging your brain. So if it's doing a crossword puzzle, if it's, playing, if it's, challenging yourself to remember a recipe from memory rather than going to the recipe card, it's challenging yourself to remember the phone number instead of just going to the person's name on your phone directory. All those things that we can do to engage and challenge ourselves are going to just help our brain and our mind work. Other things that people say to, in the category of take care of yourself for Alzheimer's or prevent Alzheimer's, is exercising every day, taking a 20-minute walk every day, making sure you get enough sleep, making sure you eat a healthy diet, making sure you're finding places to find, and, I say meditate, but it doesn't have to be meditation or sitting down and meditating. It can be taking a walk and being in a meditative space. It could be, playing with your dog or your cat and disengaging from other things, So I think building a labyrinth and walking a labyrinth can only help for all those reasons. The building the labyrinth is you're engaging and connecting in a mathematical form and creating a path and a space. Walking it certainly is challenging in the sense that you have to think. You're not just walking straight. You come to a place, you turn yourself around, you're following a path, you're engaging your space and yourself in that space. Personally, I think energetically, labyrinths create this super cool, like little magical vortex in the universe and the world that can only be good things. With my mom, initially we'd walk it. At a certain point, my dad would say things like, she's not following the path. Let her make her walk behind me so she doesn't get turned around. And eventually I was like, Dad, it doesn't matter. Just let her walk. We don't want her to trip. Their particular labyrinth is very rocky, or it's natural. It's a very natural setting. But once she stopped being able to truly walk it, we would just take her to it and go to the center. We have this lovely stone bench in the center, and we would just sit together. And even that to me was one, we were engaging in something that had nothing to do with the illness or the disease. We weren't making her take a bath. We weren't forcing her to do anything she didn't want to do. And it was a space she liked and enjoyed. So being in the center of it gave her that sense and that connection of nature, because it's in the middle of nature, of those beautiful surroundings, and to just be and be present. And she liked it till the very end. To the very end, she enjoyed and loved sitting and being in it. She would get a little confused and like we get agitated when we get her up to walk again, but she really did love it.
I found the labyrinth quite meditative, actually. When I did my research, it's about that inner reflection until you reach a center, letting, like with every layer you go inward, to letting something go. And so I found that quite fascinating, that she liked that, and she built some. And it was, even the building of one was amazing. It was quite the job. I did that for a job. Can you believe it? And the other thing that triggered something in me is that we really are only sure of this moment, of this present moment, whether it's building that labyrinth or walking the labyrinth and worrying about what may show up for us tomorrow or the day after. We're never sure of that. And in my work, I deal so often with people living in fear, whether it is fear of, no, my mom had Alzheimer's, am I going to get it? And well, do you have Alzheimer's today? No, you don't. Then just live today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we can't, none of us are fortune tellers to know what's going to happen in the future. So as long as we can be present and make, and engage with ourselves in ways that, or our people, or our animals, or our space. And one of the things that I explore a lot in my book is there's certainly some stuff about just the junk and the gunk and the things that happen stage to stage, but finding those places, finding those ways to stop. I mean, this sounds so cliche, but stop and smell the roses, stop and look at the sunflower opening, view the sunset if that makes you happy, look at enjoy the cup of coffee. Like, just it's so easy to get caught in that wheel spinning in our lives, and for us to just stop and be okay with where we are is a gift to ourselves. It's a gift to the people around us. It's really hard when you're in the midst of it and you're trying to help the person you love navigate their life as they're starting to lose their memory. It's hard. But if we can find those little things to stop, it can shift and change our own feelings of frustration or anxiety.
I found with my dad's dementia, at first when he started, my dad's dementia, I don't know the name of it, but it was an odd dementia where he had a hard time telling what was a dream and what was reality. Did it really happen many, many years ago, or did I dream it? But I don't know, but he believed a lot of really horrible things had happened. And he was always coming up with somebody new in our family that had just died a horrific death. And at first we would correct him. We would be like, no. And, we would make sure that person's there visiting that next day. And then he'd be good. And then 2 days later, that person, it was really interesting if you were to be a doctor and look at it, but as the child of, it was horrible, and especially for the person who's supposedly dead. Right? Dad, I'm still alive. But eventually we just would kiss him and say we loved him and hugged him and distract him. And did you find that a lot with your mom as well?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So many of those symptoms it doesn't even matter what kind, like there's such this wonderful, or wonderful is maybe not the right word. There's a very large breadth of different types and kinds of dementia. There are certainly some overlap in behaviors. Some of them become really, really specific. In Parkinson's, there's a lot of things that get interrupted neurologically in sleep. So there's a lot of acting out in dreams, and you don't have a lot of control of your REM, or you don't go into REM sleep. So you do some strange, so your sleep gets really interrupted, which then really affects everything else in your life. And so then some of those like illusion or delusion things start to interrupt and seep in very easily. I totally identify with that. No, that like correcting. No, someone didn't die. No, there's not mice stealing your jewelry. No, people are not listening to you in the walls. So, and it's funny now, right? I laugh about it now, but when you're, like you said, Fran, when you're in the middle of it, it's terrible. And you want to help people. My dad, he was such a truth person. He did not ever want to bend the truth. And there was this it was really difficult to get him to the place of, sometimes the right thing is to gently reframe things that might not be completely honest and truthful, but it will give them a sense of control and ownership of where they are in their journey and their space. It was hard for my dad. He did it almost to the end. And in fact, he sent me an article today that was about how important it is to that lying in gentle, appropriate lying is completely okay if the intention is to create a safe space for our person that's navigating their dementia. And he didn't do it well at all. So I didn't do it well at the beginning. I got better as we went along.
Me too. I got great at it after, though, right? You have
after you died. After you'd been dead, then you're like, okay, we'll just go.
Yeah. I was never the dead one, so I'm good. But yeah, there's multiple. I mean, we got 10 surviving siblings in my family, so there was continually somebody new that just died. Didn't I know? My dad. Didn't I know, Franny, that, so-and-so, whoever it was, my brother just died? And at first it was like, oh my God. And no one phoned me. And then, you hear the background and it's like, seriously, they got killed by a grizzly bear. I would have heard about that, right? Would have heard about it. So yeah, I hear you. And the gentle lying, we don't even call it that anymore because you can't.
It's actually becomes, and I don't know if there's a good word for it. But it's actually taking care of that it's stepping into their space that makes it real for them. And within as long as they're not like jumping off a cliff, like it's fine. It's their space that they're in, and step into it, lean into that space and let them be, because it doesn't matter. And it's that thing of, and it took a while for us to get here. And of course, when I talk about it now, it's like, and it was easier with my aunt and my uncle than it was with my mom, but it was much easier to lean into it and play with it and just be okay with wherever we were at and enjoy that space, because in my head, I knew eventually we were going to lose this. So, man, I would go back for anything to have those conversations with my mom again about the mice stealing her jewelry, because she was so adamant. And it was amazing because the next day they returned her jewelry. And I would argue with her and try to get her to see that it was just her misplacing it. And she would tell me about how amazing it was. Those mice, they returned my jewelry.
And we can laugh. It's like you said, we can laugh at it now, but when you're in the middle of it, it is not funny. At the beginning, it is not funny. And it's fear inducing, right? Because it's like, oh my goodness, what's going to be next, right? What's going to be next? But I'm from a big family, so it was so much easier to make the decisions about extended care, right? Time to move my father into an extended care facility where they're used to this kind of stuff. And did you have siblings to help you make that decision too?
Yeah. So So my brother, it's just my brother and I. So it's just the two of us. He has quite a bit younger family than I do, and he's in a very different location than I am. So he's on the East Coast of the States. He's in Philadelphia, and I'm in Denver, and mom and dad were in Colorado. So a lot of the caregiving did fall on me. He was definitely supportive and involved in, he was supportive. I think there are definitely families that find that someone is not supportive, and I think that's worse. He was, he was involved, or he would listen to me anytime I needed to call and complain and vent about either of my parents. So that was good. But those heavy lifting decisions did fall upon me and my dad. And I'm also grateful I had my dad. I think there's a lot of folks too sometimes, and there's a lot of people that, when you get to that place that you can't make the decisions, or you don't have the support structure to make the decisions, and it feels so lonely. Like there's such a loneliness when you're in it, that just feels like no one understands, or that it's so, there's a solitary sort of tunnel that happens when you're navigating the day-to-day. There is really amazing resources. The Alzheimer's Association is phenomenal. They have people that answer phones 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that can, and also can provide support and help of finding an extra, local agencies on aging or different types of caregiving that can really support, because it often feels like no one is around and no one can help, and sometimes it is difficult to take a breather and take a break, but again, to reach out and find those resources. If it isn't a family member, if there's not family to share some of the responsibilities, there may be somebody or some organization in the community that can then come in and help support, even for the caregiver to get away for a couple hours. What it does, any type of, and again, this is not just Alzheimer's, this is anyone that has cancer, anyone that has any kind of debilitating disease or illness, or there's folks that navigate long-term, lifelong illnesses, that you are in a role of caregiving, and finding places and ways to take care of the caregiver. If that's going to a support meeting, if it's going out to go grocery shopping alone, can become this wonderful, the shift from my dad when he took my mom grocery shopping to then when he went grocery shopping alone was this really significant shift. One, he wasn't having to watch to see if she was going to walk off. And he could navigate what was going in the basket, the shopping basket, better, because she would put extra stuff in the basket. And it was like this refreshing space for him to actually do something by himself. So it's really important for the caregivers to find a space.
Caregivers burnout is quite a big thing, isn't it?
And it's a big thing. And sometimes, often, the statistic of the caregiver getting a secondary illness or disease or passing away or whatever increases, and that happened, or a version of that happened with us. At a certain point, my biggest fear was that something was going to happen to my dad, and my mom was going to be alone in the house and didn't know how to do or couldn't at that time do anything. And I got really scared that, and I watched his health diminish in a really pretty extensive way. And the final push and the final, and I kind of was poking at him. We had started to look at some different places in which mom could live, and we had some options, and he didn't want to make the decision. And at the time I couldn't, I still wouldn't have. I couldn't be the one that said she's going into the facility. I still needed him to make that final call about, and we had this beautiful, lovely community that we had a bed in. And I was nervous we were going to lose the spot. Luckily we didn't. And then it was his health that really was the final push. He needed a hip replacement. And it was very clear that he couldn't recover from a hip replacement. And it was a redo, or he's had multiple joint replacements, and he couldn't walk. He was not admitting he couldn't walk, but he was in a lot of pain. And he couldn't recover and care for her. There was complications of the hip replacement. So it's a really good thing we found a community for her to be in. And then within 6 months, he had a quadruple bypass heart surgery. So his heart was broken. His leg was broken. He was broken. It was also pandemic. So it was really interesting. But I'm so grateful that we made the choices we did and that he's healthy today. With, a few things, mostly normal aging. He's 80 and he's, had a quadruple bypass heart surgery 3 years ago, or 2.5 years ago. But I'm so grateful we made the choices we did. If she had stayed in the house, he wanted her so badly to stay, and it would have broken him. He likely would have been the first one to go. And she, in turn, had the last 2 years of her life became the community was lovely. She really settled into it. She really calmed down in it. There was a lot of agitation when she was at home. And she became really calm and grounded in the last few years of her life. And I think it really set her up to transition really beautifully. She was very much at peace. Her passing was like this little gift it was almost as Alzheimer's lifted and she just was a dying person. We both felt very much like she knew us at the end. And it was really lovely and it was really beautiful. And so it also gave my dad a time to figure out that he could live alone and he could do things alone and he could be alone. And it really set us up beautifully for him to still be living.
And as you say this, I think about the nature of men in general. Men, that's what they're supposed to do, right? They're supposed to care for their family. That's, you get out there and you make that dollar because you have to care for your family. And so it must have been so difficult for him to see your mom's progression and not be able to walk and have the heart issues where, your mom's doing great. She's running away from the, supermarket. And your dad, like you said, unable, and knowing he's unable, and yet that drive, right? It's my job to take care of her, my job. I vowed till life do we part, till death do we part. And I've seen this before in other relationships as well, where the man just can't let go. And so as you're saying this, I know that there are people going to be watching us right now, and you will give them hope that, like what you have just said, is going to be, okay, maybe this is that journey. This is the direction the journey takes now, where it's in my best interest. It's in my daughter's best interest. It's in my wife's or husband's best interest that we give the care over to someone who's more special, more able to do it, more capable at this point. And I did the best I could.
Yeah. And it's so, my mom told me early on, she didn't want to be she didn't want to be locked away. That was the phrase she used. And I had these, and it was hard to actually push Dad to see that. But then this thing, like, again, it was that we were talking earlier about how you never know what's going to happen the next day. And certainly the putting her in the finding the community and getting her set up in the community was this, like, we didn't know. Sometimes in a community, someone will decide at that point. I think that we all, even someone with Alzheimer's, people with cancer, I think we have so much in the end. There is an element of our choice that we have when we decide we're going to go. And sometimes people get into a community and it will be days or weeks and they just check out. And that could have been Mom. She was already on hospice. She had lost tons of weight. She could have easily, within weeks, had decided it was time. And that would have been okay too, because that would have been the right time for her. She settled in and she had this really lovely kind of few years, and she gained a bunch of weight and then she lost the weight again. But there was this happiness and this hopefulness, weeks before she passed. She passed in early January 10, 2022. And she didn't have to be in the sort of more contained, locked down space of the community she was in. And they moved her to the kind of regular living community. And we were a little agitated because there was new people and, it was a change for us and no one likes change. And we all got flustered. And she really liked it. And part of the reason she liked it was beautifully, it was right when they started bringing in singing groups, and she got to listen to music, and she listened to Christmas carols, and she got to connect to all this activity at the very end. And so she had this really delightful journey that we certainly could not have called 15 years ago. Never would have thought, when she was telling me she didn't want to go into a facility, what a cool experience she would actually have had.
Jessica, I used to work with seniors, and it was my job I was in marketing. It was my job to convince families and seniors that it's time for them to move into this facility. And I think what you just said is something that any person in marketing can use, because it's what is it adding to their lives. Because I think this is concept for the elderly to think, the moment I have to go into a home, my life is now over. But even for somebody with your mom who already had this prognosis, it gave her life back to an extent with different activities and music. And I think the attention sometimes you get because the nursing staff to the, not patients, but to the resident ratio there is so high in the cases of Alzheimer's and memory care, that they get so much attention and they get so much care and they get so much activity that they do, a lot of times they do flare up a little bit. There's a little bit of hope that comes in. But when they don't see it, when they still see it just as I have to go into a home, they think this is the end. And a lot of times it's not.
The other interesting piece of that that's very connected, I think it's reframing what the experience is and can be. And the other interesting one is that my mom my dad was the breadwinner. My mom took care of everything in the house. She was the cook and the cleaner and the change the sheets and do the laundry. She was and she met my dad's needs a lot. She was very responsive to his needs. Their relationship was very much that. So it was in some ways kind of a traditional type of relationship. And I think it was really hard for her when she started to let her purpose became very unclear to her, as she couldn't do those things anymore. And he had to figure out how to do it. Sometimes he did it great. Other times it was harder. It was really hard for her to let go of her, even as she was losing her facility or capabilities in her mind, she was losing her purpose and she couldn't meet his needs anymore. And emotionally, physically, she couldn't meet his needs. And emotionally, she didn't know how to meet his needs. And once she was able to go into her community and the last few years of her life, she didn't have to worry about him anymore. And I think that's such an interesting dynamic that and then my dad could just go and visit her and they could just be together and they could just share space together, which was a gift to both of them at the end.
And that eliminates the stress for him too. And I think talking again about the caregiver, it's the stress of suddenly having to learn new things.
Yeah.
And take on so much responsibility. And I, unfortunately, working with seniors, I've seen exactly that, where it would be the caregiver who suddenly have a heart attack, just too much stress.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you find your background in a therapeutic touch and Reiki, belly dance, helped you in navigate the 15 years with multiple family members, meeting a significant amount of you, like your energy and your creative problem solving? Like when we talk about those little lies, we frame it as creative problem solving, right? So how did the belly dance and the Reiki and the therapeutic touch help you in those ways, as well as the labyrinth, your expertise in labyrinth?
Yeah. So, the expertise in labyrinths came out because that thing was really driven by our whole journey. Right. And that really came in later. I think those are the things the finding things for myself that are like feed my spirit and feed my soul. So the dance was certainly that. Certainly from the beginning, I've always been in and out of therapeutic touch. I've been doing since my mom taught me therapeutic touch when I was 8 years old. So she and I then took a Reiki class together, and then I recertified in Reiki years later. So those are things that are, I don't know, they're like, it's that we still have to find those things that bring us joy. And so, and to bring us balance, right? If it's going to the gym and running on the treadmill for 45 minutes, or taking a belly dance class, or those things that keep us, it's that how do you support and also find a way to feed yourself and feed your spirit and soul. I wouldn't say I did it all wonderfully. I think, there's a whole side story about some of the challenges my children, and as my kids grew from 6 and 8 to through their teenage years, which brought us through Alzheimer's. There's certainly some little rain clouds in the story too, that I'm grateful that my children are both very grounded as they're in their early 20s now, and I'm grateful that they're both grounded. But so a lot of those things was to keep me sane. So that whole entire thing is very much side practices and side passions, and doing therapeutic touch on my mom, doing Reiki on my mom through the whole thing, doing it on friends. It's really a friends and family side kind of love of my life that will always be there, because it is actually therapeutic touch is more like riding a bike than truly riding a bike is for me. So that thing where, you'll never forget how to ride a bike. Yeah, I'm not really interested in a bike, but I can do therapeutic touch and Reiki forevermore. So maybe dance too. I've been dancing my whole life too. So it's those things that you have to find, and it can be anything, right? It can be cooking. It can be, knitting. It can be anything that we find that feeds our spirit and feeds our soul on a different level when we're in the middle of it.
Amazing.
Yeah. So your book, how can we find your book?
Sure. So it is available on Amazon, and it's available in Barnes and Noble. In Colorado, we have a couple different bookstores that it's at, which is wonderful. And then it's also my website, and I can I don't know if I like say it or put it in the chat or whatever. It's pretty easy. JessicaStokesAuthor.com. And there's a link on there as well to purchase it.
And can you remind us of the name of the title of your book?
Yeah, so I have a copy too. I'll show
Right.
you. It's Seeking. I don't know how it translates in the mirror image, but Seeking Clarity in the Labyrinth, the daughter's journey through Alzheimer's. And there's a nice labyrinth on the cover.
Wonderful.
It is too. Huh. Do you have pictures? Yeah, is there pictures in there?
Yeah. I'll see if it'll look. So if you go to my website, there's lots and lots of pictures of our labyrinth. These are black and white, so I don't know if they're gonna show much, but that's my parents' labyrinth, which is a stone labyrinth. And then that's a wonderful, beautiful peak in the background that you can see from the labyrinth.
Beautiful.
Lovely.
Yes, we will put links to everything in the YouTube channel, so people can definitely.
There's another
with you.
one too.
Oh my goodness.
Beautiful.
How do you mow it? That's my question.
That's a great question. So there's actually a funny story in the book about this, of that my mom used to keep, like, she had a weed whacker and she'd just go and weed whack around and she'd like make it and she'd keep it neat. And then one time I was walking with my mom and dad and I was like, we gotta cut this. Like, this is like, and if you're walking it a lot, when it starts getting the grass growing, you can keep it kind of matted down. But there is a time that happens in the late summer when the grass really grows that it really needs a good weed whack. So that's the only way to do it. You can't actually truly mow it. And it's a kind of a battle my dad and I have. And one time I was walking it with him. I was like, this is why we need to cut this. It's like the grass is like in my, like, in your face, because it can get high. But it's really fun. There's animals, there's sometimes deer that walk it, and you find deer, deer poo, and there's some llamas in the neighborhood, so the llamas walk it, and and my dad we've always had different pets, so there's dogs and cats running through, and my kids running through when they were little was really, so it's certainly meditative and contemplative, but there's also this sense of kid footprints and in the snow, which is another interesting metaphor when you can't walk it because it's covered in snow. Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you, Jessica, and comparing stories, really, like comparing the stories of caregiving and just the journey. I mean, when my dad was getting, it's like you said, right? You move from the daughter and, like to the parent, like not only are you parenting your own children that you gave birth to, but you're parenting your parents. So life is so interesting, right? And
it's like a circle and like a labyrinth. And I have another metaphor where you're walking the labyrinth and you're behind, and then the path changes and suddenly you're in front and you're then following, and then sometimes you're behind again. Like, where are you in the journey? Who's in front and who's in back? And there's a constant shuffle of our journey as we journey anything in life, but aging parents certainly forces us into different roles.
And really a lack of control, like the acceptance that who's in control here. It sure wasn't me and wasn't my father anymore, right? Giving up control was the only way to survive. It's the only way to survive it intact, just to really let it go and just go with the labyrinth that keeps on changing, just to accept the changing labyrinth. That's the only way you can find peace.
This reminds me of the serenity prayer, and I want to read it at this moment. That God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It was such a pleasure to have you, to learn from you, to see your beautiful light, and to share in your story today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for doing what you're doing and to continuing to encourage hope in our world, because it's so needed. So
Sure
thank
is.
you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
very much.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.